In part 1 of Forced Marriage, a young woman's dream wedding to a gentleman is shattered in a single, brutal moment. Her father's secret debt leads a terrifying man to claim her at the altar, dragging her from everything she knows. She is trapped in his lavish mansion, where his coldness is more frightening than cruelty. But as she tries to find a way to survive, she discovers the most devastating betrayal of all. The man she loved is part of the very world she fears. The video ends with a single act that proves she is no longer a prisoner, but his wife, leaving her with no one left to trust. And be sure to stay until the very end, because the song we've chosen perfectly captures the painful beauty of their story. Click the link in the description below to watch the full story in part 1. The words chilled her more than the strength in his grip. Her chest rose and fell with a storm of panic and rage. She shoved hard against him, breaking free for a breath of space. In her haste, her arm clipped the edge of a porcelain vase on the side table. It toppled, crashed to the floor, the sound sharp and violent in the tense silence. Shards scattered across the rug. Evelyn stumbled back, a jagged piece slicing across her palm. She hissed softly, trying to hide the sting. But Adrian saw the crimson bead of blood instantly. His eyes flashed, not with anger at her defiance, but at her recklessness. He was a blur of motion, on her in an instant, his hand seizing her wrist. "Careless woman," he snapped, his tone like steel. Before she could retort, he forced her into a chair, his strength dwarfing hers. He crouched before her, his head bent, his hands methodically pulling a cloth from a drawer, cleaning the wound. He ignored her attempts to pull away. His grip was strong, his focus absolute. He was a man of cold, quiet power, and he was taking care of her as he would a priceless possession. She stared down at him, her pulse racing for reasons she didn't want to name. This man had terrified her at the altar, dragged her from her wedding, pinned her against a wall like she was nothing. Yet here he was, kneeling, tending to her with a strange mix of harshness and care. She whispered almost to herself, "What kind of man are you?" Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any words. He tied the cloth around her palm and rose to his full height, towering over her once more. Unreadable, untouchable. The rest of the evening passed in a strained, heavy silence. Adrian remained in the room, a brooding presence that Evelyn couldn't ignore. He moved with a quiet restlessness, pacing the length of the study, occasionally pausing at the window, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. He didn't speak, didn't offer any explanation for the raw intensity of their near kiss, didn't acknowledge the lingering tension that hung between them like a tangible thing. Evelyn watched him from the chaise, her bandaged hand resting in her lap, her mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Why did he stay? If he despised her so much, if she was truly just an unwelcome burden, why not retreat to another part of the vast mansion? His continued presence felt deliberate, a silent assertion of his dominance. Yet beneath the surface, she sensed something else, a reluctant tether that kept him bound to her, even in his anger. The low lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across the room, exaggerating the sharp angles of his face, the rigid set of his jaw. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a reminder of the relentless passage of time, the time they were forced to share. Finally, Adrian stopped pacing and stood by the fireplace, his back to her. A low murmur escaped his lips, a phrase too quiet for her to fully discern, but she caught the edge of it. Impossible woman. Evelyn's own simmering frustration resurfaced. She might be physically smaller, trapped within his world, but she would not be silenced. "And you, my lord," she whispered back, her voice laced with a sharp defiance that surprised even herself. are a man who mistakes cruelty for strength." He turned then, his gaze piercing through the dim light, locking with hers across the expanse of the room. There was no anger in his eyes now, just a raw, unreadable intensity, a flicker of something hot and dangerous that mirrored the chaotic emotions churning within her. The air crackled with unspoken words, with a tension that felt poised on the brink of shattering. The hour grew late, the mansion settling into its customary hushed silence. Adrian had extinguished all but one lamp, casting the room in a soft, intimate glow that felt wholly inappropriate given the storm that had just passed between them. He had not dismissed her, had not retreated to his own chambers. Instead, with a curt nod towards a long, plush sofa by the window, he had indicated his intention to remain in the study for the night. Evelyn watched him settle onto the sofa, his large frame barely contained by its cushions. He lay on his back, one arm thrown across his forehead, his breathing deep and even. Or so he pretended. Evelyn, despite the exhaustion that clung to her like a heavy cloak, found sleep elusive. The events of the evening replayed in her mind. The fight, the near kiss, his unexpected care. She was a tangled knot of confusion and a strange, unsettling awareness of him. Restless, she shifted in the large bed, the silk sheets rustling softly in the silence. After a long while, she decided to test the fragile boundaries between them. "If you despise me so much, my lord," she called out softly into the darkness, her voice laced with a deliberate teasing edge. "Why not sleep elsewhere? Surely a man of your stature has more comfortable accommodations." A long moment of silence stretched before he finally replied, his voice low and laced with a weary disdain. "Your presence is irrelevant to my choice of where I rest. Do not flatter yourself." His tone was cold, dismissive, but he didn't move. He remained on the sofa, a silent sentinel in the darkness. Evelyn lay there for a while longer, the silence punctuated only by their breathing. A reckless impulse, a desire to shatter the carefully constructed wall between them, took hold. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped out of the bed. Her bare feet made no sound on the thick Persian rug as she moved across the room towards the sofa. She paused for a moment, watching him. His breathing was still deep, his arms still thrown across his eyes. She couldn't discern if he was truly asleep or merely feigning unconsciousness. With a deep breath, Evelyn quietly slipped into the narrow space beside him on the sofa, her body close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his. The narrow confines of the sofa pressed them together, Evelyn's back just inches from Adrian's still form. The air between them crackled with a tension that was almost palpable. She could feel the heat of his body, the subtle scent of his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something darker, more intoxicating. For a long moment, she lay there, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of his reaction. Was he truly asleep? Or was he aware of her daring move, his silence a deliberate test? Finally, emboldened by his continued stillness, Evelyn shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing against his. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice low and husky. He remained still. She tried again, a little louder. "Adrian, I know you're awake." A low grunt escaped his throat, but he didn't open his eyes. Evelyn pressed her advantage. "You were with her, weren't you?" Isabella. A sharp pang of jealousy, unwelcome and fierce, twisted in her gut. "You still want her?" He finally stirred, turning his head slowly towards her. His eyes, when they met hers in the dim light, were dark and unreadable. "She is no longer a part of my life," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Evelyn pushed him further, her insecurities bubbling to the surface. "Then what is wrong with me? Am I not your wife? Why do you treat me with such coldness, such disdain, even after what almost happened tonight?" Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, the memory of his nearness, the raw pull between them, still vivid in her mind. He turned fully towards her then, propping himself up on one elbow, his gaze intense, searching. For the first time since their forced marriage, she saw a flicker of something raw and honest in his eyes, a vulnerability he usually kept carefully hidden. His voice, when he finally spoke, was harsh, almost grudging. But beneath the surface, Evelyn detected a flicker of something akin to truth. "She was my mistress," he admitted, his gaze never leaving hers. Not anymore. The air in the small space between them grew thick with unspoken emotions, with a passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. He was so close, she could feel his breath on her face. The raw intensity in his eyes mirrored the chaotic longing in her own heart. Their faces were just inches apart. The fragile dam of restraint finally broke. With a low groan, Adrian reached out, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her jawline. His touch, no longer rough or possessive, was now imbued with a raw tenderness that sent shivers down her spine. He lowered his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss started tentatively, a hesitant exploration, but it quickly deepened, becoming fierce, desperate, undeniable. It was a kiss that spoke of weeks of pent-up tension, of unspoken desires, of the terrifying, exhilarating pull they felt towards each other, despite the walls they had so carefully constructed. Evelyn, her initial shock giving way to a wave of overwhelming emotion, surrendered to the moment. Her arms, which had been held stiffly at her sides, slowly rose, her hands finding their way to his hair, the dark strands rough beneath her fingers. This was not just lust. It was a collision of needs, a desperate seeking of solace and connection in the midst of their turbulent world. There was fear in the way they clung to each other, a primal longing that transcended their forced union and the bitter resentment that had defined their relationship. The kiss deepened further, tongues tangling, breaths mingling, the small sofa suddenly feeling like the only world that existed. Finally, gasping for air, they broke apart, their foreheads resting against each other, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The intensity in Adrian's eyes was still blazing, but there was something else there now, a raw vulnerability that made her heart ache. As Evelyn drifted towards a restless sleep in his arms, the warmth of his body a surprising comfort against her own, Adrian whispered something so low, so softly, that the words dissolved into the darkness, lost before they could fully register in her consciousness. It sounded like a confession, a hushed acknowledgement of something profound, but the weight of her exhaustion pulled her under before she could decipher its meaning. Evelyn woke to an empty space beside her on the sofa. The warmth of Adrian's body had dissipated, replaced by a chilling emptiness. The first rays of dawn filtered through the study windows, casting long, accusing shadows across the room. The memory of the passionate embrace they had shared just hours ago felt like a dream, a fleeting illusion in the harsh light of day. She found Adrian already dressed, his dark suit impeccable, his movements brisk and efficient. He avoided her gaze as he gathered some papers from his desk, his demeanor cold and distant. The passionate man of the night seemingly vanished without a trace. He offered a curt nod, a perfunctory acknowledgement of her presence, before turning and leaving the room, the heavy door closing behind him with a definitive click. A sharp pang of hurt pierced through Evelyn's confusion. Had the night meant nothing to him? Had it been merely a momentary lapse in his carefully constructed control? She sat up, pulling the silk shawl tighter around her shoulders, a coldness settling in her heart that had nothing to do with the morning chill. She questioned her own surrender, the vulnerability she had allowed herself to feel. Had she been naive? Used? The whispers of her own insecurities began to echo in her mind. Later that morning, as she took a solitary breakfast in the grand dining room, she overheard snippets of hushed conversation between the maids as they cleared the table. "The master's reputation, you know," one whispered to the other, her eyes darting towards Evelyn before quickly looking away. "Always has had his arrangements." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, fueling Evelyn's burgeoning insecurity and leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. Breakfast with the Morello family was always a tense affair, but this morning, the atmosphere felt particularly charged. Evelyn could feel the weight of their gazes, subtle but persistent, assessing her after the events of the previous night. Adrian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his demeanor as cold and impenetrable as ever. He offered Evelyn a perfunctory greeting, but otherwise remained silent, his attention seemingly focused on the morning newspaper. His mother, Isabella Morello, a woman with eyes as sharp as shards of glass, made veiled comments about propriety and the importance of maintaining a strong family image. Her words, though seemingly directed at no one in particular, felt like carefully aimed barbs. "A wife's strength," she stated icily, her gaze flicking towards Evelyn, "lies in her discretion and her ability to uphold the family's honor, especially in the eyes of the public." A tense silence followed. Then Adrian, without looking up from his paper, delivered a short, clipped remark. "My wife's conduct is my concern, Mother. The family's honor is secure." His tone brooked no argument, effectively silencing any further gossip. Evelyn watched him, a flicker of surprised gratitude warming the cold knot in her stomach. He might be emotionally distant, his private actions confusing and hurtful, but in the public eye, he would protect her. He would uphold his responsibility, even if it was born more of pride and obligation than genuine affection. It was a small thing, a shield held up more out of duty than love, but in the echoing silence of the grand dining room, Evelyn recognized it as a form of protection nonetheless. That night, Evelyn tried to speak with him. He refused warmth, his pride battling his heart. She throws sharp words, piercing his ego. His eyes flash. She sees tears he hides. He leaves the room, but with quiet dignity, not a tantrum. Evelyn wakes in the night to find his sofa empty. He's gone. Next day, he doesn't return. A day passes, then 2, then 3. Evelyn smiles politely with the family, but inside she aches. She realizes she misses him, even his harshness. A servant whispers that Adrian has been spotted elsewhere, looking different and broken. The days after Adrian's disappearance were an unbearable void. The mansion, once a suffocating prison, now felt like a terrifyingly empty tomb. Evelyn moved through the grand, silent rooms like a ghost, a polite smile plastered on her face for the servants. But inside she was a churning mess of anxiety and a terrifying, unfamiliar ache. A day passed, then 2, then 3. She ate, she slept, she spoke, but every moment was a torment of unanswered questions. Where was he? Had he truly left her? Was she so insignificant that he could simply vanish without a word? The fear that had once been a constant companion had now been replaced by a raw, painful need to see him again, to understand. She missed him. Even his harshness, even the cold tension that had defined their time together. His absence had revealed a truth she wasn't ready to face. She had gotten used to him. On the 3rd day, the silence was broken. She was in the parlor, staring out the window at the bleak, rain-soaked gardens, when she heard the front door open. A low murmur of voices echoed from the grand hall. She felt a jolt of electricity run through her, a mix of relief and terror so potent it made her knees weak. It was him. She found him in the great room, a faint lamplight casting long, dramatic shadows around his towering frame. He was standing with his back to her, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, a testament to his return. He looked different. The usual sharp lines of his face were blurred by a fatigue so deep it seemed to weigh down his very bones. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and his hair, usually slicked back, was slightly disheveled. He looked broken. A wave of emotions, a raw, uncontrollable storm of rage, pain, and a terrifyingly potent longing washed over Evelyn. All the questions, all the silent torment of the past 3 days bubbled to the surface. She moved towards him, a quiet fury in her steps. She grabbed a large cushion from a nearby chair, its soft fabric a stark contrast to the violence in her heart. She didn't know what she would do with it. She only knew she had to get his attention. "Why?" she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound that barely carried across the room. Adrian didn't move. He didn't turn. He just stood there, a stone statue of a man, and the sight of his silence sent her over the edge. "Why are you so cold?" she shouted, the words tearing from her throat, laced with an unbearable agony. She started hitting him with the cushion, her blows weak and ineffectual against his hard frame. She was crying now, hot tears streaming down her face, the sobs racking her body. "Why do you have a heart of steel? You took me and left me like nothing. You took me and you just left." Adrian didn't try to defend himself. He didn't shout back. He just let her hit him, the soft thuds of the cushion a pathetic rhythm against his suit. He was silent at first. He let her rage burn, let her pain wash over him. Then, slowly, with a quiet strength that felt more powerful than a shout, he lowered his glass to a table and turned. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were no longer cold. They were a maelstrom of raw, tortured emotion. He grabbed her arms, stilling her furious, ineffectual blows, and pulled her close, holding her against his body. He held her tight, his embrace a hard, suffocating cage. But it was a cage that felt like a lifeline. Evelyn buried her face in his chest, her body still shaking with sobs. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm that matched her own. His arms were trembling, a single shuddering tremor that she felt from his body into hers. Evelyn felt him move. He turned his face away from her, his jaw set in a hard line. He lifted one hand and brought it to his mouth, biting down hard on the skin of his wrist, a quiet, desperate act of a man fighting to keep from breaking. He was fighting back tears. He was fighting back a raw, desperate need to comfort her. He was holding back a pain so profound it was almost visible. She felt him take a deep, shuddering breath. He finally loosened his hold, just enough to look at her, his eyes still a maelstrom of emotion. He reached a hand up to her cheek, and with a thumb that was rough and trembling, he wiped a tear away. He leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was meant for her ears alone. "I promise you," he whispered, the words a raw, quiet oath that felt more profound than any grand declaration. "It will never happen again. We will be different." He didn't say what would be different. He didn't say how. But the words were a promise from a man who had never uttered a single word of hope before. Evelyn stared at him, her body still trembling, not from fear, but from a dizzying, terrifying uncertainty. Can a man like this keep such a promise? Adrian kept his word. The very next day, a car was arranged, and without a word of explanation, he took her away from the cold silence of the mansion, away from the watchful eyes of the servants, away from the heavy, suffocating air of New York City. The destination was Texas, a sprawling, sun-bleached ranch that felt like a different world entirely. The air was dry and smelled of dust and wide-open spaces, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic air of the city. For the first time, Evelyn felt she could breathe. At the ranch, she saw another side of him, a side she never knew existed. He changed out of his impeccably tailored suits and into work pants and a simple white shirt. He spent his days in the stables, with the horses, his movements deliberate and calm. She watched him ride, his large frame graceful atop a powerful stallion, the lines of his face softened by the sun. He laughed once or twice, a low, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise even him. The laugh wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was genuine, and it sent a strange jolt through Evelyn's heart. One evening, they were in the kitchen. He had a bag of flour on the counter, and Evelyn, with a reckless defiance that was born of a week without his cold restraint, dared him. "You don't know how to cook," she teased, a small, genuine smile on her face. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes held a warmth she had never seen before. "I know how to survive," he said, his voice a low grumble. He handed her a bowl and a whisk. "Teach me." They cooked together, a clumsy, awkward dance of hands and ingredients. Their fingers brushed, their arms bumped, and for a moment, the tension that had always defined their interactions was replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. Evelyn found herself laughing, a soft, unforced sound that felt foreign on her lips. She began to think maybe he could change. Maybe the cold, impenetrable man was just a costume he wore for the city, for his family, for the world. Maybe this man who worked with his hands and laughed in the sun, was the true Adrian. The week at the ranch was a fragile, beautiful illusion. She found herself smiling faintly, a tiny, tentative curve of her lips that she hadn't felt in months. The smile wasn't for the sunny skies or the wide-open spaces. It was for him. She wondered if this was the man hidden beneath the steel, the man she was just beginning to know. Part 3. Sweet Times and Fragile Peace. Their last few days at the ranch were a series of quiet, tender moments that felt like a beautiful, fragile dream. They went for long walks under the sun, their footsteps crunching softly on the dry earth. Evelyn, a city girl, was unused to the uneven terrain. She stumbled, her foot catching on a loose rock. Adrian, who was walking slightly ahead of her, turned instantly. He didn't ask if she was all right. He simply reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip rough, but steady, his touch keeping her from falling. He held her for a moment longer than necessary before releasing her, his face a perfect mask of indifference. His body, however, was a different story. She could feel the hard line of his arm, the tense strength of his muscles. The touch was not one of kindness, but of a possessive, protective instinct that was beginning to feel less like a threat and more like a comfort. One afternoon, Evelyn sat on the porch swing, a book open on her lap. She was restless, unable to focus on the words, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings she couldn't sort through. She looked up and saw Adrian sitting on the top step, his back to the sun, a newspaper in his hands. He was silent, his presence a quiet, constant weight. He wasn't watching her, but he was there. He was always there. The act was so simple, so quiet, and yet it felt more profound than any grand gesture. He was just present. One evening, a soft, warm breeze rustled through the open windows, bringing with it the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. Evelyn looked up from her book and saw Adrian watching her. He didn't look away. For a long moment, their gazes were locked, and in the silence, Evelyn felt a new kind of connection, a silent conversation passing between them. A small smile touched her lips, a tentative, shy thing, a flicker of something that looked almost like affection, crossed Adrian's face, softening the harsh lines of his jaw. He didn't return the smile, but his eyes held hers with an undeniable warmth. Evelyn felt a soft, unforced laugh bubble up from her chest, a light, happy sound that surprised her. Adrian's gaze held hers, a faint, almost imperceptible ghost of a smile touching the corner of his lips. For a single, fleeting moment, she didn't feel like a prisoner, a captive bride. She felt like a wife. She began to realize that she was falling, not for the fantasy of a gentle man, but for the complex, contradictory reality of Adrian. A dangerous thing, hope. She was starting to hope that this man, This terrifying man was capable of love. The return to New York City was a jarring shock. As the black car pulled up to the grand, oppressive mansion, the fragile peace of the ranch dissolved. The city lights were cold, the air was heavy, and the silence of the house felt more like a tomb than ever before. Adrian became a different man. The simple shirts and work pants were replaced by his perfectly tailored suits, his casual air of quiet contentment replaced by a chilling, impenetrable coldness. The man who had laughed, who had cooked with her, who had watched over her with a gentle, silent presence, had vanished without a trace. He slept on the sofa in their room, never touching her, never even acknowledging her presence beyond a curt nod. His restraint hurt her more than his harshness. The distance between them was a physical pain, a cold, vast emptiness where a fragile sense of connection had once been. The silence of the city was a different kind of pain, an emotional void. One night, Evelyn could no longer bear it. She walked to the sofa where he lay, a dark, brooding silhouette in the dim lamplight. "Adrian," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Do you think this is easy for me? This game you're playing? You were different at the ranch. You were human. And now you're back to this heart of stone. You push me away as if I don't exist." Adrian sat up, his movements slow and deliberate. His face was a mask of cold, perfect control. But his eyes, when they met hers, held a storm of emotions she couldn't decipher. "Do you think it's easy for me?" he snapped, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "Do you think it's easy for me to see you, want you, and fear hurting you? Do you think it's easy to have a woman who looks at me with a hatred so deep it burns, even when I am doing everything in my power to keep you safe?" He paused, his eyes burning with a dark, desperate intensity. "You think my distance is a sign of my heart turning to stone. But you are wrong. My distance is not rejection, Evelyn. It's fear. It's fear of a world I cannot control, a world that I have brought you into. I am terrified that I will lose you. I am terrified that I will hurt you. It is a terrifying thing to see you and not be able to touch you." He stood, his towering presence filling the room, his eyes a direct, unwavering accusation. "I'm afraid that if I let you in, I will become a monster that even I cannot control. Do you understand?" Evelyn was left speechless, the shock of his confession leaving her breathless. His distance wasn't rejection, it was fear. Fear of a world he couldn't control, a world he had brought her into. She finally understood. His distance was not rejection. It was fear. The words hung in the air, a raw, devastating confession that shattered the carefully constructed walls between them. Evelyn stood there, still, silent, her mind reeling from the devastating truth he had just revealed. He wasn't cold. He was afraid. Afraid of a world he had created, a world he had brought her into. The knowledge was a crushing weight in her chest, a new kind of pain. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her heart aching for the man who was so terrified of his own feelings that he would push her away. She had to know. She had to try. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't let this face. Don't let us fade. If you're afraid, if you're terrified, then let us face it together. Let us try. Let us try to make this work. Don't let us fade away. Don't let us become strangers again, please." She moved closer, her hands reaching out to touch him. She wanted to feel his warmth, his presence, to feel him, a man so human, so terrified. She wanted to prove to him that she was not afraid. She wanted to prove to him that they could make this work. Adrian recoiled, his face a perfect mask of cold, impenetrable control. His eyes were dark, a stormy gray that promised only danger. "Don't," he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "You do not understand what you are asking for. It is not a game." Evelyn's frustration returned, hot and sharp. She had to break through. She had to get to him. She had to make him see that she was not afraid. She had to make him see that she wasn't Thomas. She had to make him see that she was his wife. She took a desperate step closer. "Then let me go," she said, her voice shaking with a desperate, wild anger. "Send me back to my father. Or Thomas." At the mention of Thomas's name, Adrian went rigid. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury erupting in their depths. The name was like a poisoned dagger, a direct, brutal assault on his pride, his control, his very being. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He just stood there, a terrifying, silent statue of a man, his eyes burning with an emotion so raw, so potent, that Evelyn recoiled. The rage in his eyes was all-consuming. It was a silent, powerful, dangerous storm that she had foolishly dared to unleash. He turned, his back a solid wall of fury, and walked out of the room. A moment later, she heard the front door close with a soft thud. A car engine started, the sound fading into the silence of the night. Evelyn stood there, trembling, the echo of his rage lingering in the air. She had touched a dangerous nerve. She had said a name that held a deeper power than she had ever imagined. The man who was so afraid of his own feelings had been driven away by a single word. And for the first time, Evelyn realized that her heart was in more danger than ever before. The house felt like a cold, empty tomb without Adrian's presence. Evelyn moved through the grand rooms like a ghost, her mind a whirlwind of torment. She had pushed him. She had used Thomas's name, and she had driven him away. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating weight in her chest. Hours passed, then an entire day. She ate a few bites of food, but her stomach was a knot of anxiety. The silence was louder than any words, an unending torment of unanswered questions. Where was he? Had she pushed him too far? Would he ever come back? The emotional and physical strain of the past few days finally took their toll. She was in the parlor, staring out the window at the bleak, rain-soaked gardens, when she felt a dizzying wave of nausea wash over her. Her legs felt weak, her body a puppet with its strings cut. She swayed, her hand flying to her head, and the world began to tilt on its axis. The next thing she knew, the ground was rushing up to meet her. A maid, who had been passing by in the hallway, saw her fall. She rushed into the room, her eyes wide with fear, and immediately went to summon Adrian's mother. The matriarch of the Morello family, a woman with a face carved from granite, was in the family hall. She rushed to Evelyn's side, her expression a mix of concern and sharp-edged suspicion. The family doctor was called. He arrived in minutes, his bag in hand. He examined Evelyn, who was now lying on a sofa, a cool cloth on her forehead. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. The doctor spoke quietly to Adrian's mother, his words a low murmur. "Your son's wife is exhausted. She is suffering from severe emotional and physical strain. But she is also—" He paused, his gaze meeting the mother's. "She is also pregnant." Evelyn heard the words. The world seemed to stop. The news was a shock so profound it stole her breath. A rush of emotions, a raw, wild mix of fear, hope, and an utter, paralyzing terror washed over her. She knew that the news would be a catastrophe. She was so afraid of what Adrian would do. She was terrified of what he would say. "Please," Evelyn whispered, her voice a reedy, desperate plea, her eyes fixed on Adrian's mother. "Please, don't tell him. Don't tell Adrian. I'm afraid. Please, swear to me you won't tell him." The mother's gaze, which had been cold and discerning, softened. She saw not a manipulative woman, but a terrified girl. She saw not a threat, but a victim. The mother knelt beside her, a look of profound, heart-wrenching compassion on her face. "I swear it, child," she whispered, her voice low and grave. "Your secret is safe with me." Evelyn closed her eyes, tears of both fear and fragile, terrifying hope trickling down her temples. She was pregnant, with Adrian's child, and for the first time, she was afraid of his reaction. The silence in the grand hall was thick with unspoken truths. Adrian's mother, Isabella, was torn. She had made a promise to a girl who was now her daughter, but she also knew her son. His coldness, his rage, his need for control. She had witnessed it her entire life. She knew that he would not take the news of a child lightly. She knew that he would view it as a betrayal, a trap, a tool to be used against him. She found Adrian in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a look of quiet torment on his face. He didn't look up when she entered. He just stared at the fire, his eyes burning with a silent, consuming fury. She knew he was a man who lived by a code, a man who saw the world as a series of transactions and power plays. A child was not a part of the deal. It was a complication that would test his control in ways he could not even begin to comprehend. She sat opposite him, and the silence stretched between them for a long moment. Finally, she broke the silence. "Adrian," she said, her voice low and grave, "your wife is not well." He did not reply. He did not look at her. He just stared at the fire, his eyes a cold, impenetrable steel. The doctor was called. "She fainted." "It's a symptom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A symptom of something more. Something that will change everything." Adrian slowly set his glass down on the table, his movements precise and deliberate. He turned to face her, his eyes cold, sharp, and unnervingly still. He waited. He knew his mother would not lie to him. He knew that she had something to say. "Your wife," she whispered, the words a heavy, crushing weight in the silence, "is carrying your child." Adrian froze. His entire world seemed to shift on its axis in that instant. His face, which had been a mask of quiet torment, was now a portrait of utter, complete shock. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at his mother, his eyes wide, his body rigid, his silence carrying a storm. He felt a rush of emotion so profound, so terrifying, that he couldn't even begin to comprehend them. He was a father. The thought was a cataclysm, a force that would shatter the world he had so carefully constructed. He stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the city, the lights a blur. He was a man who had built a life of control, of power, of absolute, unquestioning authority. And now, a life, a beautiful, terrifying life, was growing inside of his wife, a life that was beyond his control. He stared out into the city, the drink in his hand untouched. His eyes were burning with emotions he wouldn't name. He was a man who had just been given the one thing he didn't know he wanted, the one thing he was terrified of. The news of the pregnancy, the raw, terrifying hope of a future she had never dared to dream of, filled Evelyn with a quiet, desperate need. She needed to see her mother. She needed to see the woman who had always protected her, who had always loved her unconditionally. It was a desperate plea for a sense of normalcy in a world that had become a terrifying, beautiful prison. She told Adrian that she was homesick, that she wanted to see her parents. She did not admit the truth. She did not admit her fear. She did not admit that she was so terrified of his reaction that she would rather face the consequences of a lie than a truth. Adrian allowed the visit. His face was a mask of cold, unreadable emotion, his eyes a blank slate. But he sent guards. He sent 2 silent, watchful men who stood outside her parents' house, a constant, looming presence. They were not there to watch her. They were there to protect her. A single, silent act of possession that felt like both a threat and a strange kind of comfort. He was a man who would never admit he cared, but his actions spoke a different language. Evelyn was back in her childhood home. Her mother rushed to her, her face a mixture of relief and concern. She held her in a tight embrace, her eyes scanning her daughter's face for any sign of a lie. Evelyn told her mother that she was pregnant. She told her that Adrian knew, that he was happy. She lied. She told her mother that everything was perfect, that she was happy, that she was safe. She did not want her mother to know the truth. She did not want her to know that her daughter was a prisoner, that her daughter was so terrified of her husband's reaction that she would rather lie than face the truth. Her mother believed her. She saw not a frightened girl, but a happy, beautiful wife, ready to start a family. Evelyn was back in her old home, but she was not the same woman anymore. She was a different woman. A woman who was a wife, a woman who was a mother, a woman who was trapped in a dangerous world with no one left to trust. Back at the mansion, Adrian was a man consumed by a silent, unbearable torment. The house felt empty without her. Her scent lingered in the hallways, in the study, in the bedroom. He slept on the sofa in the study, never touching the bed she had slept in. He was a man who had built his entire life around control, a man who saw emotion as a weakness. And now, he was a man who was consumed by an emotion so profound, it was a physical pain. He missed her. The silence of the mansion, which had once been his sanctuary, was now a void, a deafening absence that echoed with her presence. He felt a deep, profound ache in his chest, a longing so raw it felt like a sickness. The audience sees him alone, his control slipping. His face, which had once been a mask of cold, perfect control, was now a portrait of a man on the verge of breaking. There were shadows under his eyes. His jaw was unclenched. He was a man who was falling apart, a man who could no longer hide the raw human emotion that had consumed him. He stood in the middle of his empty bedroom, his hands clenched into fists, his body trembling with a torment he couldn't name. He whispered her name into the empty room, a soft, desperate sound, a confession of a man who could not admit he needed her. He was a man who was so terrified of his own emotions that he would rather suffer in silence than admit the truth. He was a man who was so terrified of his own feelings that he would rather push her away than risk hurting her. Adrian gripped the arm of his chair, his body rigid, his heart finally breaking. He was a man who was about to lose everything he had ever held dear. He was a man who was about to lose the one person who had ever made him feel alive. The storm was coming, the one he had so carefully tried to control, the one that was about to shatter his world. The car pulled up to the grand, imposing mansion, a fortress of dark stone that had become both a prison and a strange kind of home. Evelyn was back. She had been away for a week at her parents' house, a brief, fragile return to a world that no longer felt like her own. Now, the weight of Adrian's presence, the quiet, suffocating air of his house, settled over her once more. She was carrying his child, but she still hadn't told him. The secret was a heavy, terrifying weight in her heart, a secret she wasn't yet ready to share. Adrian was waiting for her in the grand hall. He was a dark, brooding silhouette against the afternoon light, his face a perfect mask of cold indifference. He did not smile. He did not rush to her side. He simply stood there, a silent, unmoving statue of a man. His greeting was a curt nod, a cold and formal acknowledgement of her return. But as she walked towards him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and an unbearable longing, she noticed the small, subtle signs of a man who was fighting to keep his emotions in check. His jaw was clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. His hands, though held casually at his sides, were clenched into tight fists. The storm inside him was raging, and he was doing everything in his power to keep it from breaking. He did not touch her. He simply turned and walked with her, his presence a heavy, suffocating blanket of possession. As they moved through the halls, Evelyn saw the guards. They were everywhere. 2 of them stood by the front door. Another 2 stood by the staircase, The guards had been doubled. This was not a sign of fear. It was a sign of a man who was fighting to keep her safe, a silent, possessive act of protection. He was a man who saw threats everywhere, a man who was so terrified of losing her that he would turn his house into a fortress to keep her safe. As they walked towards their room, Adrian, without a word, pulled her close, his hand on her arm. The gesture was not a romantic one. It was a cold, possessive act of ownership. His hand lingered on her arm for a moment too long, a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of her presence, of her body, of the life growing inside her. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. She was a woman who was a prisoner, but a prisoner who was being protected. She was a woman who was carrying a secret that would change everything. She was a woman who was beginning to feel a sense of safety in the arms of the man who had taken her. The house had settled into a strained, suffocating silence. Evelyn was a woman living in two worlds, the world of polite society, where she was a beautiful, elegant wife, and the world of her mind, where she was a captive, a prisoner of her own heart. Adrian's coldness was a constant, a heavy, suffocating weight that she could not escape. His protectiveness, however, was a growing, a terrifying reality. She was a woman who was safe, but a woman who was being suffocated by the very man who was keeping her safe. One afternoon, Evelyn was in the gardens, a book open on her lap. She was restless, unable to focus on the words, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and questions she couldn't sort through. A voice that she had once loved, a voice that now sent a shiver of pure, cold fear down her spine, broke her concentration. My, Thomas said, stepping out from behind a large rose bush. Look at you. A queen in her castle. Evelyn's heart stopped. She stared at him, her body frozen. She hadn't seen him since the docks, since the horrifying reveal of his true nature. The man she had loved stood before her, the same kind, gentle face, but his eyes were hard and cold. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Thomas, she whispered, her voice a reedy, choked sound. He walked toward her, his movement smooth and confident. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, cruel thing. You look well, Evelyn. Adrian is taking good care of you. But don't be fooled. He isn't your salvation. He's your cage. One day, he'll crush you too. His words were poison, a cold, calculated attempt to break her spirit. Evelyn recoiled, her body trembling. He was no longer a symbol of her past life. He was the embodiment of a venomous betrayal. She wanted to scream, to ask him why, but the words were a stone in her throat. She felt like a trapped animal, caught between two monsters. Adrian entered the garden then, his presence a sudden, chilling cold. He had heard. His face was a mask of perfect, icy calm, a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. His gaze, a storm of fury, was fixed on Thomas. You breathe her name again, Adrian said, his voice low, chilling, but without a trace of a shout. It was a promise, a lethal, final warning. You breathe her name again, and I'll bury you under it. The words were a brutal, absolute threat. Thomas's face went white. He opened his mouth to reply, but Adrian's gaze was a physical force, a silent, powerful command to obey. Thomas simply nodded, his face a mask of fear. He was a player in this game, but Adrian was the god of it. Evelyn watched him walk away, her body shaking with a profound, terrifying realization. Adrian's power was terrifying, but it was also fiercely protective. He had not just saved her from a monster. He had saved her from a monster that wore the face of the man she loved. The shock of the encounter with Thomas left Evelyn reeling. The next few days were a blur of torment. Adrian was a terrifying contradiction, a man who had sworn to bury another for breathing her name, yet who still treated her with a cold, impenetrable distance. The silence between them was a physical pain, a cold, vast emptiness where a fragile sense of connection had once been. Evelyn could no longer bear it. She found him in the library, a book open on his lap, a glass of whiskey in his hand. She stood in the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a raw, desperate need to be heard. "Adrian," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You don't let me breathe, yet you won't let me go. What am I to you?" Adrian slowly looked up, his face a mask of cold, perfect control. But his eyes, when they met hers, held a storm of emotions she couldn't decipher. "You are my wife," he snapped, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for you." Evelyn's frustration returned, hot and sharp. She had to break through. She had to get to him. "Do you think this is easy for me? This game you're playing? You push me away as if I don't exist." Adrian stood, his towering presence filling the room, his eyes a direct, unwavering accusation. "Do you think it's easy for me? To see you, want you, and fear destroying you? Do you think it's easy for me to want to touch you, to hold you, to be with you, and have to hold myself back? Do you think it's easy for me to be so terrified that I will lose you?" His confession was raw, a single, devastating truth that shattered the last of her illusions. His words left her breathless. He wasn't cold. He was afraid. Afraid of a world he had created, a world he had brought her into. He was terrified of his own emotions. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice a raw, unyielding plea. "You already love me. Your actions prove it. Your fury, your protection, your fear of losing me. That's not a game. That's love. I know it is." He was speechless. He just stared at her, his jaw unclenched, his eyes wide with a look of a man who was seeing himself for the first time. He had a heart of steel, but she had found the cracks. The conversation was a raw, emotional storm that Evelyn couldn't shake. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and questions she couldn't sort through. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was a woman in a deeply complicated relationship with a man who was terrified of his own feelings. The emotional and physical strain of the past few days, the betrayal, the fear, and the unending tension finally took its toll. She felt a dizzying wave of nausea wash over her, a sudden, powerful sense of weakness so profound it made her knees buckle. She was in the parlor, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens, when the world began to tilt on its axis. She swayed, her hand flying to her head, and the ground rushed up to meet her. Adrian found her on the floor. His reaction was not a shout. It was a silent, lethal burst of motion. He was on her in an instant, his hands on her face, his eyes wide with a raw, terrifying panic she had never seen before. He carried her to the sofa, his body rigid, his movements precise and desperate. He looked at her, his face a mask of a man who was fighting to keep from breaking. He spoke her name, a single, reedy word that was filled with a primal, desperate fear. "Evelyn, Evelyn, what's wrong?" he whispered, his voice a raw, unyielding plea. She didn't have the strength to lie. The truth was the only thing she had left. I'm pregnant, Adrian. I'm carrying your child." The words hung in the air, a final, crushing weight. Adrian's face, which had been a mask of raw, terrifying fear, was now a portrait of utter, deep-seated emotion. His hands, which were already on her face, began to tremble. His gaze, wide with an emotion she could not decipher, was fixed on her. He had already been told by his mother, but hearing it from Evelyn's own lips, seeing the terror and vulnerability in her eyes as she said the words, was a shock of a different kind. It was the moment of her confession. It was real. He knelt beside her, his body rigid. He whispered, "You're carrying my child." He said the words not as a question, but as a statement, a low, gravelly sound filled with a profound and terrifying reverence. It was the one thing he didn't know he wanted, the one thing he was terrified of. It was the truth of her confession that shattered his world, not the news itself. The silence in the days after the revelation was a different kind of silence. It was no longer cold or heavy with unspoken threats. It was a silence of profound, terrifying change. Adrian was a different man. The change was not obvious to the outside world. To others, he was still Adrian Morello, cold, unreadable, commanding. But with her, he had transformed. He became intensely, terrifyingly protective. The walls he had so carefully constructed came crashing down. He no longer slept on the sofa in the study. He slept on the bed, but he did not touch her. He just watched over her, a constant, silent presence. He silenced anyone who questioned her, his voice a low, chilling whisper. He shielded her fiercely, his body a solid wall between her and the world he had so carefully constructed. He refused to leave her side. He was a man who was consumed by a single, powerful instinct: to protect his wife, to protect his child. Evelyn began to soften. She saw the change. She saw the man behind the mask. His love was not a warm, tender thing. It was a fierce, protective, possessive thing. He didn't say the words, but his actions spoke a different language. He brought her flowers, not with a gentle smile, but with a curt nod, as if the act was a burdensome duty. But she saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a desperate, undeniable need to make her happy. She saw that his heart of steel was a shield, a protection he had built to keep the world away. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a woman in a deeply complicated relationship with a man who was terrified of his own feelings. She began to see that his love was not a weakness. It was a terrifying, beautiful strength. Adrian's world was a dangerous place, and he had made her a part of it. He was a man who saw the world as a series of transactions and power plays. A child was not a part of the deal. It was a complication that would test his control in ways he could not even begin to comprehend. He had uncovered Thomas's true betrayal. The man who had been her past, her hope, was a poison. Thomas had been feeding information to rivals, endangering not just Adrian, but Evelyn. The betrayal was a calculated, cold, and brutal act. Thomas had not just betrayed Adrian. He had betrayed Evelyn, using her as a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was a part of. Adrian unleashes his full wrath. The fury was icy, not loud. He was a man who saw emotion as a weakness. His rage was a cold, silent, and brutal thing. He used his power, his influence, and his family to crush Thomas. Evelyn watched him. She saw his brutal efficiency, his terrifying calm. She saw him for what he was, a man who was a living, breathing weapon. But for the first time, she saw that his violence was born from a terrifying, fierce, and unyielding need to keep her safe. He was not a monster. He was a man who was willing to destroy everything to protect the people he loved. She finally understood. His heart of steel was forged to protect, not to destroy her. The threat was crushed. The world was silent once more. Evelyn was with Adrian, his presence a powerful, comforting weight. She had watched him destroy a man who had once been her hope. She had watched him with a strange mix of fear and admiration. She had seen him for what he was, a man who was a living, breathing weapon. And for the first time, she was not afraid. She looked at him, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and a raw, profound love. He was a man who was willing to destroy everything to protect her. She loved him. She didn't know how or when it had happened, but it had. "I can't hate you, Adrian," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "Even when you terrify me, I can't. I can't hate you." Adrian's face, which had been a mask of cold, perfect control, finally cracked. He was a man who had built his life around control, a man who saw emotion as a weakness, and now he was a man who was completely and utterly broken. A single tear, a raw, hot confession ran down his cheek. He looked at her, his eyes a maelstrom of emotion. "I was afraid, but I loved you from the moment I saw you," he said, his voice raw and filled with a pain that she had never, ever heard before. "I just didn't know how. I didn't know what it meant to love you. I just knew that I had to have you." He lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was not a forced, violent thing. It was a passionate, desperate, and beautiful thing. It was the culmination of pain, of defiance, and of a raw, beautiful surrender. Their love was born of a brutal, cold, and calculated act. But it was a love that was real. The threat was crushed. The world was silent once more. Evelyn was with Adrian, his presence a powerful, comforting weight. She had watched him destroy a man who had once been her hope. She had watched him with a strange mix of fear and admiration. She had seen him for what he was, a man who was a living, breathing weapon. And for the first time, she was not afraid. She looked at him, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and a raw, profound love. He was a man who was willing to destroy everything to protect her. She loved him. She didn't know how or when it had happened, but it had. "I can't hate you, Adrian," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "Even when you terrify me, I can't. I can't hate you." Adrian's face, which had been a mask of cold, perfect control, finally cracked. He was a man who had built his life around control, a man who saw emotion as a weakness, and now he was a man who was completely and utterly broken. A single tear, a raw, hot confession ran down his cheek. He looked at her, his eyes a maelstrom of emotion. "I was afraid, but I loved you from the moment I saw you," he said, his voice raw and filled with a pain that she had never, ever heard before. "I just didn't know how. I didn't know what it meant to love you. I just knew that I had to have you." He lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was not a forced, violent thing. It was a passionate, desperate, and beautiful thing. It was the culmination of pain, of defiance, and of a raw, beautiful surrender. Their love was born of a brutal, cold, and calculated act. But it was a love that was real. The story closes with Evelyn in Adrian's arms, pregnant, safe. The family begins to accept her. His grandmother blesses the union. Adrian, once silent and cold, is now a man visibly softened only by her. He places his hand over her stomach and whispers that their child will never grow up in the shadows like he did. End on a strong romantic image. Evelyn finally smiling at him, realizing her forced marriage has become her greatest love.
I build my walls from stone and fear, a heart of steel that no one nears. But every time you raise your voice, it breaks the silence. I lose my poise.
You took my hand, but not my will. You left me trembling, standing still. Yet in your anger, I see it clear. The man you hide is drawing near.
We're bound in chains of fire, a love we can't deny. Your coldness cuts, but still I bleed and fall into your We're poison, we're salvation. We're truth wrapped up in lies. I hate to love you, yet I do. Till the end of time. I swore I'd never let love through, but every scar still leads to you. You curse my name, I hear your cries, yet hold you closer every time.
I swore I'd never beg or bend, but here I stand, and here I'm in. You guard your heart, but not your hands. They hold me tighter than I planned.
We're bound in chains of fire, a love we can't deny. Your coldness cuts, but still I bleed and fall into your eyes. We're poison, we're salvation. We're truth wrapped up in lies. I hate to love you, yet I do. Till the end of time. If love's a curse, I'll bear it whole.
If hate's a gift, it scars my soul.
If fate's a cage, I'll lock it tight.
If you're my sin, I love the cry.
We're bound in chains of fire, a love we can't deny. Your touch destroys, your touch redeems. It burns, it sanctifies. We're poison, we're salvation. We're truth wrapped up in lies. I hate to love you, yet I do. And I always will. Your heart of steel was made to feel.